It was a cold winter evening when Armin finished his work and returned to his small apartment near the old railway station. The streets were quiet, covered with a thin layer of frost, and the wind cut sharply through the narrow alleys. Despite the chill, he felt a warm sense of satisfaction. Today had been a regular day for him, not exciting or extraordinary, but it had been productive. He had helped a neighbor carry groceries, fixed a leaking tap in his apartment, and completed all his office tasks. Yet, something about the cold air and the quiet streets made him feel reflective, almost as if life had paused for a moment just for him to think. Armin had always been a simple man. He lived modestly, worked diligently, and never asked for much. He had few possessions, and he preferred it that way. His life wasn't glamorous, but it was peaceful. Tonight, as he entered his apartment and hung his coat, he noticed the pile of old clothes he had kept in a corner for months. They were mostly winter jackets, sweaters, and some old shirts. Nothing fancy, but they were warm and usable. He had been meaning to donate them for a while, but life always seemed to get in the way. Work, errands, fatigue of it created excuses. But tonight felt different. There was a strange clarity in his mind, as if the cold air outside had cleaned away the clutter in his thoughts. He decided that tonight he would finally do it. He gathered the clothes carefully, folding them neatly and placing them in a large plastic bag. As he did, he thought about the people who might need them. Perhaps there was a family struggling in the cold, or someone sleeping on the streets who would find comfort in these garments. He imagined a small smile spreading across their faces when they felt the warmth, and that image made him feel lighter. Almost as if he were already giving the clothes, the journey to the station was short. Only a few minutes' walk from his apartment. The path was empty. The only sounds were the faint hum of distant traffic and the occasional clatter of a train passing far off in the night. The station itself looked abandoned in the darkness. Its paint was peeling, the benches were worn, and the platform lights flickered intermittently. Yet for Armin, there was a strange beauty in it. The emptiness made it peaceful, almost sacred. He placed the bag of clothes near the donation point behind the station, a small sign indicating it was for those in need. It wasn't much, but it felt right. As he stood there for a moment, looking at the bag, he felt a strange sense of satisfaction. He had done something good without expecting anything in return. There was no applause, no recognition, just the quiet satisfaction that comes from helping someone in need. He smiled to himself, brushing a strand of hair from his forehead, and started walking back home. The cold wind bit at his cheeks, but he felt warm inside, as if the simple act of kindness had ignited a tiny flame in his heart. The walk back was quiet. The streets seemed lonelier than usual, and the streetlights cast long shadows that danced with the wind. Armin's mind wandered. He thought about his life, his choices, and the small joys that often went unnoticed. Life was strange, he realized. It was full of ordinary moments that, when pieced together, formed the story of a person. Today had been one of those ordinary days, but now, thanks to a single act of giving, it felt different. It felt meaningful. As he reached his apartment, he paused at the doorway, glancing back at the station from a distance. The platform lights flickered like tiny stars in the cold night. For a fleeting moment, he imagined someone finding the clothes, feeling warmth on a cold night, and whispering a quiet thank you into the darkness. The thought made him chuckle softly, and he turned the key in his door. Inside, the apartment was warm and quiet. He hung his coat, poured himself a cup of tea, and settled by the window. Outside, the wind howled softly, and the city slept. Armin sipped the tea slowly, savoring the warmth that spread through his body. He thought about how small actions could ripple into unexpected outcomes. Who knew what good could come from donating a bag of old clothes? Perhaps nothing would happen, and yet something in him felt that the night held possibilities he couldn't yet see. Time passed quietly. Armin went about his usual evening routine, reading a few pages of a book, checking his emails, and then glancing at the clock. The night was deepening, and the world outside his window seemed to exist in a different rhythm. Slower, quieter, and more mysterious. He felt a gentle tiredness, the kind that comes after a day well lived. Soon, he would sleep, but a small part of his mind remained alert, sensing that the night was not yet over, that somehow the ordinary act of giving could lead to something extraordinary. He finally prepared for bed, laying out his blanket and dimming the lights. Yet sleep didn't come immediately. He thought about warmth and comfort, about the people who lacked it, and about how fragile life could be when left in the cold. In the quiet of his room, he realized how little it took to make a difference. One bag of clothes, a few minutes of his time, and yet it might have changed someone's life, even in the smallest way, as he drifted toward sleep. He felt a gentle stirring of anticipation, though he couldn't explain why. The night outside continued in silence, but somewhere behind the old railway station, the bag of clothes waited. It seemed ordinary, forgotten by the world, yet it carried within it the potential for something unexpected. Something that would soon shatter the quiet of that night and draw Armand into a reality he could never have imagined. And so, the first part of the story closed not with drama or spectacle, but with quiet reflection. Armand's ordinary life had intersected with a small act of kindness, an act that seemed simple and unremarkable. Yet in the stillness of the winter night, in the emptiness behind the station, the stage was set for an encounter that would change everything. The cold wind blew softly across the rooftops. The distant hum of the city continued, and Armand finally closed his eyes. He didn't know it yet, but the night was far from over. The small bag of clothes behind the station was about to become the bridge between the ordinary and the extraordinary, between the human world he knew and a reality he could not yet understand. And in that moment, the story began, quietly, almost invisibly. In the shadow of a winter night, in the warmth of a simple, selfless act. The next morning, Armand woke to a pale winter sun peeking through his thin curtains. The air in his apartment felt colder than usual, and he noticed the quiet hum of the city seemed different. It wasn't louder or busier, just off. Something about the day felt unusual, though he couldn't put his finger on it. After finishing a quick breakfast, he grabbed his coat and stepped outside. Deciding to take a short walk near the old railway station, the station looked the same as it had the night before. Cold, empty, and abandoned. The platform lights flickered lazily, and the rails glimmered faintly under the weak morning sun. He thought about the bag of clothes he had left there. Normally he wouldn't think twice, but today a strange curiosity nudged at him. He wondered if someone had found them, if they were useful to anyone. He hesitated for a moment, then decided to walk around the back of the station to check. The alley behind the station was narrow and cluttered with old crates, rusted metal, and broken benches. The morning light barely reached this part, and the shadows seemed longer, deeper. As Armand stepped carefully over some scattered debris, he thought he heard a soft, almost inaudible noise like someone shivering or whispering. He froze and listened. There it was again, a faint sound. So small, it could have been the wind, but it didn't sound like wind. He moved cautiously toward the source. His curiosity mixed with a sudden tension he couldn't explain. Behind a stack of old wooden crates, something stirred. At first, he saw only a bundle of clothes huddled on the ground. But then he noticed movement, a trembling, almost human movement. He stepped closer, and his heart began to beat faster, peering carefully. Armand was shocked to see a young woman crouched behind the crates. She was shivering violently, wrapping herself around the clothes he had donated. Her hair was damp and stuck to her pale face, and her thin frame was trembling uncontrollably. The sight filled him with concern. "Are you okay?" he asked gently, keeping his voice low. The woman looked up. "Okay." And for a moment Armand felt a chill that had nothing to do with the winter air. Her eyes were the first thing he noticed, large, dark and strangely reflective, as if they held shadows of something beyond human understanding. She didn't speak at first. She only stared, tilting her head slightly. Her body curled as if protecting herself from an invisible threat. Armand's instincts took over. He crouched down a little distance away and tried again. "It's cold out here. Do you need help?" Slowly, she reached for the clothes, wrapping them tighter around herself. He noticed something strange. The clothes were the ones he had left, and yet they seemed almost alive in her hands. She pressed them to her chest. her fingers trembling as she clutched them like a lifeline. Her face, pale and anxious, seemed familiar in a human way. But there was something unusual about her movements. She didn't react like someone who had spent a night in the cold before. Her breathing was uneven, almost mechanical, and when she finally spoke, her voice was soft, careful, and slightly off. "You," she whispered, but the words sounded rehearsed. Like she had learned them rather than spoken naturally. Armin's mind raced. Who was she? How had she ended up here? The answers didn't make sense. No one in the city would come to this abandoned spot willingly, and yet there she was, shivering, vulnerable, and entirely reliant on him. He felt a mix of fear and responsibility. Despite how strange the situation was, he couldn't leave her there. He carefully took off his coat and draped it over her shoulders. "Here, this will help," he said. She hesitated for a moment, then allowed it. The extra warmth seemed to relax her slightly, though her body still trembled with exhaustion. Armin stepped back, trying to give her space while keeping a watchful eye. Something about her presence made him uneasy, as if he were standing on the edge of a world he didn't understand. "Can you tell me your name?" he asked. She paused, looking at him with wide, alert eyes. "I don't remember," she said finally. The words were simple, but they sounded odd, unnatural. Armin noticed the faint accent in her speech, though it wasn't any accent he recognized. Every part of her seemed human, yet every part seemed slightly different. He realized he needed to act carefully. The world beyond the crates might not be ready for her or for what she represented. For now, she was fragile, cold, and scared. He guided her gently to a slightly sheltered corner behind the station where the walls blocked the wind. She sank to the ground, wrapping herself in the donated clothes and his coat. As she warmed slightly, Armin observed her more closely. Her skin had a strange tone, paler than usual, almost luminescent in the morning light. Her eyes seemed too large for her face, and the way she moved was deliberate, precise, and unfamiliar. It wasn't threatening, but it was alien in the truest sense of the word. He felt a shiver run down his spine. Realizing that what he was witnessing was not normal, he sat quietly nearby, unsure whether to call for help or stay alone with her. Something told him that ordinary authorities would not understand this situation, and yet he couldn't leave her alone, not in this state. He had made a small difference the night before by donating the clothes, but now that simple act had transformed into a responsibility far beyond anything he had imagined. Minutes passed slowly, the silence broken only by the soft hum of the station and the occasional distant train. The woman began to speak again, her voice low and careful. She pointed toward the horizon, as if trying to explain something, but the words were fragmented and didn't make sense. Armin leaned in, trying to piece together her meaning, but he realized she might not even be from his world. Something deep inside told him she wasn't human. Fear mixed with awe in his mind. He had read stories, seen movies, heard legends about people encountering things beyond ordinary life, but he had never believed them. Yet here she was, wearing the clothes he had donated. Alive because of a simple act of kindness, and entirely dependent on him. His heart pounded. He had no idea what to do next, only that he couldn't abandon her. The woman shivered again, and he instinctively wrapped the coat around her more tightly. "It's okay," he said softly. "You're safe here. No one will hurt you." She looked up at him, her eyes reflecting both fear and a strange gratitude. There was a depth in her gaze that went beyond words, a silent communication that felt almost spiritual. In that moment, Armin understood that this encounter was not random. Something about fate had led her to him, to these clothes, to this quiet station. He realized that helping her would be more complicated than he imagined. She didn't speak his language clearly, and her reactions were unpredictable. Yet he also felt a strange connection, a human bond that transcended logic. She was scared, fragile, and dependent, and he could not turn away. He decided, without fully knowing why, he would do whatever it took to help her. As the morning deepened, Armin looked around the station. It was still empty, still quiet, but now it felt different. It was no longer just a place where trains came and went. It had become a sanctuary, a threshold between the ordinary world and something extraordinary. The bag of clothes he had left behind had brought him here, had brought her here, and somehow it had changed everything. The woman leaned back slightly, exhausted, and closed her eyes, finally resting for the first time since he had found her. Armin watched over her, torn between disbelief and concern. How had a simple bag of donated clothes led to this? How had his ordinary life intersected with something so unimaginable? He didn't have the answers, but he knew one thing. He could not leave her here. Not now. Not ever. The station remained silent, and the winter wind whispered softly across the platform. Armin sat there for hours, thinking, planning, and watching her slowly regain strength. Every movement she made seemed cautious, deliberate, as if she were learning to exist in this world step by step. And in the quiet of that winter morning, Armin felt a strange sense of purpose. The ordinary act of giving had led to the extraordinary, and he would face whatever came next. By the time the sun was fully up, the world outside the station had begun to bustle with its usual life. People hurried along the streets, unaware of the quiet miracle unfolding behind the old railway station. Armin stayed with her, feeling the weight of responsibility, but also a growing determination. He realized that he had been given a chance to do something truly remarkable, something beyond ordinary human experience, and he would not waste it. The day stretched on, and still she rested in the warmth of the clothes and his coat. Armand fetched water from a nearby tap, spoke softly to her in gentle tones, and tried to reassure her with small gestures of kindness. The world outside might never understand what was happening here, but that did not matter. In this quiet corner behind the station, an impossible connection had formed, one that would forever change his life. Days passed since Armand had discovered the shivering woman behind the old railway station. He had taken her to a quiet, sheltered corner where the wind couldn't reach, and he continued to care for her carefully. Every day brought small progress. She no longer trembled uncontrollably, and her breathing became steadier. Yet, there was something about her that continued to puzzle him. She looked human, but the way she moved, the way she observed the world, was different, like someone studying it for the first time. Armand noticed details that made him uneasy. When she touched objects, it was with a strange precision, almost as if she were learning their function rather than using them naturally. Her eyes reflected a mix of fear, curiosity, and confusion. She would sometimes tilt her head in ways no ordinary person would, staring at him with a gaze that seemed both innocent and calculating. She spoke, but her words were unusual. She didn't know common phrases. She sometimes repeated words as if trying to memorize them. One morning, Armand decided he had to try to communicate more clearly. "I want to help you," he said softly. "Can you tell me where you are from?" The woman paused, and for a long moment, her eyes looked distant, almost seeing something far away. Then she spoke, her voice trembling, yet clear in its strange cadence. "Not from here," she said. Armin's heart skipped a beat. The words were simple, but the meaning was extraordinary. She wasn't human, at least. Not in the way he understood humanity. Fear and awe gripped him simultaneously. Could this really be true? Could someone really exist in the world who was not of this planet? He tried to calm himself to think rationally, but the evidence was right before him. She was fragile, she was scared, and she had somehow ended up in his life because of a bag of clothes he had donated. The thought was almost too surreal to accept, yet it was undeniable. As the day progressed, he watched her carefully. She seemed to understand small gestures of kindness. When he offered her a piece of bread or a cup of water, she hesitated for a moment, studying the objects as though seeing them for the first time, then accepted them with a quiet gratitude. Her movements remained careful and precise, her body tense even when she was no longer shivering. She did not know his world, and he realized that every simple act, breathing, walking, drinking, eating, was new and strange to her. Armand began to notice that she reacted strangely to the cold, unlike normal humans who would shiver or feel discomfort. She sometimes seemed unaffected, and other times completely vulnerable. Her skin did not react normally to touch. Her eyes seemed to reflect light differently, almost luminescent in the dim shadows of the station. He tried to keep his fear contained. but he could not deny it. There was something undeniably otherworldly about her. He decided that he needed to know more, but also that he had to be careful. She had already survived something traumatic, arriving here in a state of extreme vulnerability. Rushing her or demanding explanations would only frighten her. Instead, he focused on simple care: food, warmth, comfort, and patience. He spoke softly to her, telling her stories of the human world, explaining everyday things like chairs, cups, and lights. She listened intently, sometimes nodding as if understanding, sometimes tilting her head in confusion, trying to memorize the sounds and meanings of his words. One evening, as the sun set behind the station, casting long shadows across the platform, she began to move differently. She stood slowly, her eyes scanning the area as if listening to sounds he could not hear. "Path home," she whispered, repeating the words carefully. Armand felt a chill run through him. The words were cryptic, but they held urgency, a deep need that he could not ignore. She was searching for something or someone, and it was clear that her journey was far from over. Armand sat beside her, careful not to startle her. "I will help you," he said. "I don't know how, but I will help you find your way." Her eyes met his, and for a moment the fear in them softened, replaced with trust. It was fragile, delicate, but it existed. She allowed him to touch her arm gently, a gesture of reassurance that seemed to calm her. In that moment, Armand realized the depth of his responsibility. This wasn't just a stranger in need. This was someone completely dependent on him for survival in a world she didn't understand. Over the next few days, Armand watched as she began to adapt, slowly learning about her surroundings. She noticed small details humans take for granted: the way birds flew, how sunlight felt on skin, how water moved when poured. Yet even as she learned, she remained distant, as though part of her mind was elsewhere, connected to something he could not perceive. Occasionally, she would close her eyes and make soft sounds, almost like humming, but not in any melody he recognized. It was alien, yet oddly comforting in its rhythm. Armand's curiosity grew alongside his concern. He wanted to understand where she came from, why she had arrived in this world, and what had led her to this abandoned station. At the same time, he feared that pressing for answers could frighten her, undoing the fragile trust they had built. He realized that patience was crucial, that sometimes care meant waiting and observing rather than asking questions. One night, as the city slept under a blanket of frost and fog, something remarkable happened. She rose from her resting place, her movements fluid and deliberate, and pointed toward the sky. Her eyes glowed faintly in the dim light, and her hand trembled as she traced shapes that made no sense in human language. Armand felt a strange energy fill the air. It wasn't threatening, but it was powerful, something that defied explanation. He approached cautiously. "What is it?" he asked softly. She looked at him, and for the first time, he felt a connection deeper than words. She tried to speak, but the words came out fragmented. Home, far. Need. She touched her chest, then pointed upward, then back to him, as if trying to convey something beyond simple language. Armand realized that she wasn't just lost in his world, she was lost in an entirely different reality, one that he could barely comprehend. Fear, wonder, and responsibility filled him all at once. He had stumbled into a situation that no ordinary person would ever encounter. Yet despite the strangeness, he could not turn away. She was alive because of his small act of kindness, and now it was his duty to protect her, to help her survive, and perhaps to help her return to wherever she truly belonged. Days became nights, and nights became a cycle of care, observation, and quiet communication. Armand noticed that she responded to empathy and calmness. Loud noises, sudden movements, or harsh tones frightened her immediately, while gentle words and warmth soothed her. Slowly, he began to understand the importance of patience and presence. She was learning from him, and in return, he was learning about resilience, trust, and the fragile balance between fear and hope. One morning, he watched as she finally moved with purpose, rather than hesitation. She explored the small space behind the station, touching walls, crates, and the bag of clothes with a careful curiosity. She picked up small stones, examining their weight and texture, turning them over in her hands, as if trying to memorize every detail. Armand realized that even the simplest objects were new and fascinating to her, and he felt a renewed sense of responsibility to protect her innocence while helping her adapt. The true nature of her situation began to reveal itself in small, subtle ways. She reacted differently to light, sound, and touch. Her movements were precise, almost mechanical, but carried an unfamiliar grace. She didn't eat or drink in the same way humans did. Sometimes she seemed to draw energy from the air or the warmth around her. Every observation confirmed what Armand had begun to suspect: she was not human. And yet, she had arrived in his world completely vulnerable, completely dependent, and completely trusting him. By the end of the third week, Armand realized something profound. This was no ordinary encounter. His small act of donating clothes had led him to someone or something that had the potential to change his life entirely. The fear of the unknown lingered, but it was tempered by a deep empathy and a desire to help. He had entered a world he could not fully understand, yet he felt that he was meant to be here in this place. At this moment, he sat beside her one evening, watching the shadows stretch across the abandoned station, and felt a quiet determination settle in his heart. He did not know where this journey would lead, or what dangers they might face. But he knew one thing with certainty: he would not abandon her. Whatever she was, whatever she had come from, whatever mysteries surrounded her, he would stand by her side. The ordinary world continued outside the station. People hurried through their routines, unaware of the extraordinary life unfolding in the shadows. But for Armand, the ordinary had changed forever. The woman, fragile and mysterious, had transformed his reality, opening his mind to possibilities he had never considered, and showing him that sometimes the smallest acts of kindness could lead to the most extraordinary encounters. And so, as the night deepened and the cold wind whispered across the platform, Armand watched over her. He didn't know what tomorrow would bring, but he knew it would be extraordinary. The stranger he had discovered behind the station was no ordinary person. She was a mystery, a miracle, and a responsibility. And for the first time in his life, Armand felt that he was exactly where he was meant to be. Days turned into weeks, and Armand realized that hiding the mysterious woman behind the old railway station was only becoming more difficult. The weather was growing colder, and the wind howled through the abandoned platform, making even the sheltered corner barely warm enough for her fragile body. Yet, despite the chill, she had begun to adapt, moving with more confidence and awareness. Her eyes no longer darted constantly in fear, but instead scanned her surroundings as if learning, always cautious, always alert. Armand had grown protective of her in ways he could hardly explain. Each morning he brought food and water, checked for signs of sickness, and made small improvements to their temporary shelter. He moved quietly around her, careful not to startle her. He had learned that sudden gestures or loud noises caused panic, and he respected her space while remaining close enough to help at a moment's notice. Their bond had grown, wordless yet deep, based on trust, care, and the fragile connection of two beings navigating an impossible situation together. Despite this, tension lingered. The world outside the station carried dangers that Armand couldn't control. Occasionally, people passed by the station, curious or careless, and he had to guide her away from visibility. She understood enough to hide quietly, crouching low or stepping behind crates, her large, luminous eyes fixed on him for guidance. Even with her growing awareness, it was clear she was still learning about human behavior, and mistakes could draw attention they could not afford. One afternoon, Armand noticed signs of people investigating the station. A distant car stopped nearby, its headlights cutting across the empty platform. He ducked instinctively, pulling her close. She followed his movements without question, mimicking his careful, deliberate actions. Armand's heart raced. He realized that if anyone saw her, the consequences could be severe. He didn't know who they were, perhaps local authorities, perhaps someone else entirely. But he knew he could not risk exposure. That evening, he whispered softly, "We have to be careful. No one can see you." She nodded, her large eyes reflecting fear but also understanding. She didn't speak much anymore, but she listened, absorbing every instruction, as though survival depended on it, which it did. Armin's protective instincts grew stronger with each passing day. He felt responsible for her life, for her safety, and for her eventual return to wherever she truly belonged. As the nights grew longer, Armin began preparing for contingencies. He moved their shelter to a slightly more hidden spot behind a stack of crates and discarded wooden panels. He placed blankets and extra layers of clothing around her, ensuring she would stay warm through the bitter nights. Each night, he stayed awake longer than usual, watching over her as she slept, her chest rising and falling with an almost fragile rhythm. Her presence was both comforting and alarming, a reminder of the extraordinary reality he had stumbled into. One night, as the wind rattled the broken windows of the station, she woke suddenly. Her eyes glowed faintly in the darkness, and she moved with a speed and precision that startled Armin. She whispered urgently, pointing toward the distant horizon and then to the ground near the tracks. Armin realized she sensed something he couldn't, a presence or a signal invisible to human perception. Fear and concern gripped him. Something was coming, something that could threaten her safety, and he had to act quickly. He guided her gently back into the deeper shadows behind the station, covering her with blankets and his coat. "It's okay. Stay still," he whispered. Her eyes remained fixed on the horizon, alert and focused. Armin felt a mix of awe and terror. She was unlike anything he had ever seen, yet she trusted him completely. He realized that his small act of kindness, the bag of clothes, had created a responsibility far greater than he had ever imagined. This was no longer just a secret. It was a delicate mission to protect a being entirely unlike himself. The next few days were tense. Armin noticed increased activity around the station, footsteps echoing in the distance, voices carried faintly by the wind, and the occasional bright light scanning the area at night. He realized that staying hidden required constant vigilance. He spoke to her softly, teaching her small ways to move quietly, to sense danger, and to avoid drawing attention. She learned quickly, mimicking his movements with a grace and focus that both amazed and unsettled him. Her ability to adapt was extraordinary, yet her vulnerability remained. One mistake could expose her, and he could not allow that. Despite the stress, there were moments of calm. In the quiet afternoons, he taught her small human gestures, simple routines, to help her feel more comfortable. She learned to drink from a cup, eat from a plate, and fold the clothes neatly that had once saved her from the cold. Sometimes she even smiled faintly, a small, almost imperceptible expression that made Armin's heart swell with a mix of relief and wonder. It was a fragile happiness, temporary and fleeting, yet it gave him hope. However, the danger never fully disappeared. One evening while Armin was fetching water, he noticed a group of people approaching the station. Panic surged through him. He rushed back to her side, quietly guiding her to hide behind crates. She crouched low, her body tense, her large eyes fixed on him for direction. The footsteps drew closer, voices murmuring unintelligible words. Armin held his breath, praying they wouldn't see her. Every second stretched endlessly, the air heavy with tension. By some stroke of luck, the group passed by without noticing them. Armin exhaled slowly, relief washing over him. He turned to her, who was still crouched, trembling slightly despite the blankets. He placed a gentle hand on her shoulder. "It's okay. They didn't see you," he whispered. She nodded, but he could see the lingering fear in her eyes. The incident reminded him of the constant danger they faced, and the weight of his responsibility pressed heavily on him. Over time, Armin realized that protecting her was not just about hiding her from humans. It was about understanding her needs, her instincts, and her limitations. She was learning, yes, but she was still far from understanding the human world fully. Every new sound, every sudden movement, every unfamiliar object could trigger fear. Armin had to remain vigilant, not just physically, but emotionally. He had to be calm, patient, and reassuring at all times, even when his own fear threatened to overwhelm him. One cold night, as snow began to fall lightly around the station, she spoke again, her voice breaking the silence. "Home, need to go," she said. Armin listened carefully. She pointed to the sky, then to the tracks, then back to him. It was clear she wanted to leave, but she didn't know how. Armin realized that protecting her now included helping her find a way back, wherever that may be. It was no longer just about survival. It was about trust, hope, and guiding her to her true path. The weight of the situation pressed heavily on him. He had never imagined his ordinary life would intersect with something so extraordinary. Yet, he could not turn away. Every choice he made, every careful step, was a part of a delicate balance. One mistake could expose her. One misstep could endanger them both. And yet he felt a strange certainty that he was exactly where he needed to be, that this responsibility was somehow meant for him. The nights continued, each one colder and longer than the last. Armin remained awake longer than ever, ensuring her safety and comfort. He moved silently, checking blankets, adjusting positions, and observing the surroundings for any sign of danger. She had begun to rest more peacefully, but he could tell that her mind was always alert, scanning, analyzing. He realized that she was not only learning from him, but also teaching him something profound: patience, empathy, and the importance of silent vigilance in the face of uncertainty. One evening, as the moon rose high over the abandoned station, casting a pale silver light, she reached out to him. Her hand was small and delicate, trembling slightly. Armin took it gently in his own. She looked up at him with those strange, luminous eyes, and for the first time, he felt an unspoken understanding pass between them. It was a bond forged not by words, but by shared survival, trust, and the fragile hope of finding a way forward together. Armin realized that protecting her was no longer optional. It was a responsibility he had chosen, a mission born from a simple act of kindness that had led to an extraordinary encounter. Every day, every moment, he would remain vigilant, patient, and caring. He did not know what dangers awaited them, or what challenges they would face, but he knew that he could not abandon her. As the cold wind whispered through the broken windows of the station, Armin held her hand and whispered softly, "We'll get through this. I won't let anything happen to you." She squeezed his hand gently, her eyes reflecting trust and something else, a quiet hope, fragile yet persistent. And in that moment, Armin understood the depth of their connection. This was no ordinary act of protection. It was the beginning of a journey, one that would test courage, patience, and the limits of human understanding. The days had grown colder, and the nights stretched longer over the abandoned railway station. Armin had grown used to the rhythm of caring for the mysterious woman, the way her large, reflective eyes would follow him as he moved, the way her small, delicate hand would reach for his when she felt afraid. Yet, despite the comfort of their quiet routine, there was a tension in the air that neither of them could ignore. She wanted to leave. He knew it from the way her eyes scanned the horizon, tracks in the sky, the way she whispered fragmented words he was only beginning to understand. Home. Need. Path. Armin realized that the time for waiting was over. He had kept her safe for weeks, hidden her from curious passersby, and nurtured her back to health. Now, the real challenge lay ahead, helping her return to wherever she belonged. The thought was terrifying. He did not know where her home was, how she would get there, or what dangers awaited. And yet, despite his fear, he felt a strange certainty that this was his responsibility. The same small act of kindness that had brought her into his life now demanded courage. Beyond anything he had ever imagined, he began preparing for the journey in secret. Supplies were gathered quietly: blankets, extra clothing, water, and food. Every movement was cautious, every sound measured, for even the slightest attention from outsiders could put them at risk. The city continued its usual rhythm outside the station, unaware of the extraordinary mission unfolding in its shadow. Armin explained every step to her in soft, simple words. She listened carefully, occasionally repeating his phrases in her strange melodic voice. She seemed to understand more than she could express, and he trusted that her instincts would guide her as much as his care did. The night they chose to leave, the station was silent. Snow had begun to fall, coating the platform in a soft white blanket. Armin guided her quietly along the hidden paths behind the station. She moved cautiously, but confidently, mimicking his careful steps. Her eyes glowed faintly in the moonlight, alert to every sound, every shadow. Armin's heart pounded. He knew that once they left the shelter of the station, the unknown dangers of the city and the world beyond would test them in ways he could not predict as they moved through the empty streets. He noticed signs of human life in the distance, dim lights in apartment windows, distant footsteps, the occasional car passing slowly along the frost-covered roads. Each time, he pressed her closer to his side, guiding her behind walls and through narrow alleys. She followed without hesitation, trusting him completely. Armin marveled at her bravery, at her ability to remain composed despite being so far from home. So far from the familiar world she once knew. Hours passed, and they finally reached the edge of the city, where the buildings gave way to open fields and faint trails that seemed to disappear into the horizon. She paused, her eyes scanning the sky and the distant landscape. Armin understood that they were close to the place she had been searching for. She whispered a single word, almost a prayer, "Path." He nodded silently, encouraging her to continue. Suddenly, a strange light appeared in the distance. It was soft at first, like a distant star, but it grew brighter, moving closer in a way that made the air feel charged. The woman's body stiffened, and she turned toward it, her eyes wide with recognition and relief. Armin did not know what the light was, but he sensed its significance. It was her way home, whatever that meant. And it was the reason she had come to him in the first place. A deep sadness and warmth filled Armin's heart at the same time. He had grown attached to her, cared for her, and shared a bond that transcended language and understanding. Letting her go felt impossible, yet he knew that keeping her here would deny her the very thing she sought: her home, her world, her path. He took a deep breath, suppressing the lump in his throat, and whispered, "It's time. You need to go." She looked at him with her large, luminous eyes, and for the first time, she seemed to understand the complexity of human emotions. She stepped closer, her hand brushing his in a gentle, almost sorrowful gesture. Armin held her hand tightly for a moment, feeling the fragile warmth, the unspoken gratitude, and the silent bond that had formed between them. Then, with a slow, deliberate movement, he released her hand, allowing her to move toward the light. The light grew brighter, enveloping her in a soft glow that seemed to pulse with life. Armin watched, heart racing, as she stepped into it. For a brief moment, she looked back, her eyes full of trust, hope, and a strange, unearthly beauty. Then she disappeared into the light, leaving only the faint echo of her presence and the empty snow-covered field. Armin stood there in silence, the cold wind brushing against his face. The station, the city, and the world seemed to hold their breath. The extraordinary being he had discovered, cared for, and protected was gone, returning to a world he could not imagine. He felt a mixture of loss and relief, sadness and joy, as the realization settled in. He had done the right thing. He had honored her trust, her journey, and the small act of kindness that had started it all. Days passed after that night, and the city returned to its normal rhythm. Yet Armin's life was changed forever. The ordinary world he had known, the quiet apartment, the empty streets, the small routines now felt different. He had glimpsed something beyond human understanding, something extraordinary, and it had left a mark on him. He often returned to the station, not out of expectation, but out of reflection, remembering the moments of fear, wonder, his connection that had shaped the weeks he spent with her. He noticed subtle reminders of her presence everywhere, the warmth of the coat she had worn, the way snow fell across the platform, the quiet rustle of the wind through the crates. Each memory reminded him that even the simplest act of kindness, a bag of old clothes, could ripple outward in ways he could never predict. He had learned that life was fragile, mysterious, and capable of extraordinary encounters if one was open to them in the quiet moments. He reflected on her trust, her courage, and the unspoken bond they had shared. She had arrived at the station shivering, lost and fragile, wearing the clothes he had donated. Through patience, care, and empathy, he had helped her recover, adapt, and finally return to her home. The experience taught him more than he could have imagined about resilience, compassion, and the profound impact of human connection, even with someone who was not entirely human. One evening, months later, Armand walked past the station again. The platform was empty, the crates and debris still scattered, the cold wind whispering through the broken windows. He paused, glancing at the shadows where she had once hidden. For a moment, he thought he saw a faint glow, a shimmer in the air, and he smiled softly, even though the field was empty. It was as if she had left a trace, a memory, a reminder that extraordinary things could exist in the quiet corners of the ordinary world. Armand continued his life, ordinary in appearance, but profoundly changed inside. He carried with him the memory of her eyes, the weight of her trust, and the lesson that small actions could lead to extraordinary consequences. The world outside remained unaware of the extraordinary journey that had unfolded behind the station. But Armand knew that life would never be the same. He had seen, cared for, and released something beyond human understanding, and in doing so, had become part of a story far greater than himself. The bag of donated clothes, once a simple act of giving, had been the bridge between the ordinary and the extraordinary. It had connected him to a being from another world, challenged his understanding of life, and changed his heart forever. And though she had returned to her path home, Armand felt a quiet satisfaction knowing that he had helped protect it and honored her in the best way possible. As the sun set behind the city, casting long shadows across the empty platform, Armand stood quietly, taking a deep breath of the cold winter air. The extraordinary encounter had ended, but the lessons, memories, and sense of wonder remained. He smiled softly, knowing that even in a world that often felt ordinary and predictable, miracles could exist in the quietest moments, sparked by the simplest acts of kindness. And so, life continued for Armand, ordinary in its surface, but forever changed within. The woman he had saved, cared for, and ultimately released was gone. But the story of their encounter remained a story of courage, empathy, and the extraordinary power of small acts of human kindness. It was a story he would carry with him always, a reminder that sometimes the universe had a way of teaching the most profound lessons through the quietest and simplest gestures.